Welcome into another edition of New Track Record. Caleb Hatch and Justin Kinney with you, and we've made it. We finally have a race to recap. Race, I guess, in quotes. It was a dominating performance by Josef Newgarden to win the 20th Firestone Grand Prix of St. Petersburg on the streets of St. Pete, and of course also combined with the Albert Wooded Airport. Dominant performance. He won the pole. He won the race. Not often that has happened in the history of this event. But a good start for Newgarden and a good start for us for our championship picks, as we both selected Newgarden to be the title winner. Of note, he won this race in 2019 en route to the title. I believe the last driver to win the first race of the season win the championship was Scott Dixon in 2020.
Yes. So setting the tone, because it's always the overriding, who can get off to a fast start? Well, Josef Newgarden and Penske and Chevy all with fast starts over the weekend.
Yes, and the Chevy aspect is something we'll get to as well, as Chevy had a very dominating performance at that. So great weekend for Newgarden, great weekend for Penske. Kind of quiets the critics as well, talking about stuff behind the scenes in terms of investing in the series and all of that. Penske probably had to feel pretty good about his team getting a win after all the off-season chatter going into St. Pete.
It definitely was, and at least for a weekend, we're not talking about off-track things.
Yes, thankfully.
Thankfully.
For now. We'll see what next week.
Yeah, for now. We'll
see what next week brings as we lead into thermal. But yes, it's definitely worth mentioning that's been a good side. Also, Alex Palou won at Barber in 2021. So I guess that would actually be the most recent one.
Okay, yeah.
Because again, that St. Pete was the second race and not the first. So
true.
But first time a driver has won St. Pete, and the last time they went on to win the championship was Newgarden himself in 2019. So
there you go.
There you go. So we'll get into our three things. We'll get into other elements from across the weekend. Obviously, a great crowd on hand. Haven't seen any final tallies, but they were saying things were trending up 10% up over last year.
I did see something, and I think it was through a St. Pete media source, where the final numbers weren't out, but the projection was that over 200,000 people took in at least a portion of the weekend at St. Pete, which is phenomenal.
Do you buy that number?
Not really. I mean, I'm sure it's counting every single person that was around the track in some capacity or whatever. But Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're telling me 200,000 people were there? Are they counting the people in the high rises that aren't, really buying tickets? They're just watching. Seems like a elevated number, but we do know that the crowd was up. I wouldn't say 200,000, but whatever St. Pete was say, as long as St. Pete's happy, we're happy.
Up is up, as we like to say.
Up is up.
And it definitely was a great-looking crowd on TV. I think there's no doubt that this was one of the better, if not the best crowd we've seen at St. Pete in history over the course of time. All right, time to get into our three things. And obviously, Josef Newgarden getting the win, but that's maybe not necessarily my biggest takeaway. My biggest takeaway, I think, was Chevy's dominance. I mean, you look at this race, and I pointed out on the Twitter account, at one point, Chevy was 1 through 4. Well, they finished 1 through 4. They had 6 of the top 10, but none of the Honda cars had anything for the pace. Even when Colton Herta got the strategy right, going with the pit window, came out and proved his position, was running as high as third, they weren't able to do anything about it. And yes, he was competitive, but the Hondas had nothing for the Chevys in this race. I think that was my biggest takeaway.
No, they didn't, and it helps when Penske's a Chevy team because they finished 1, 2, and 4. And you look at just the when we talk about this engine formula, and there's just not much else to get out of the engines at this point. Chevy seems to at least found something, at least on the road and street courses to start the season. So very impressive what Chevy was able to do and the dominance they showed. Does it set the tone for the rest of the season? Too early to say, but Chevy off to a good start. 1, 2, 3, sweep the podium. Penske off to a good start, as I mentioned. 1, 3, 4, and kind of picking up where we left off in terms of the dominance of Penske. And when you look at, Penske versus Ganassi, do you say Penske has the advantage because of Chevy? Who knows at this point? Too early to say, but so far so good through one event.
Yeah, one event, and we'll see how it plays out. But we did see Andretti have speed on a street course. Maybe not the dominance we expected, especially because Herta, you thought he could truly contend for pole. That didn't really play out. Marcus Ericsson also in the Fast Six. He had a mechanical. But overall, I think Penske making a statement. Chevy dominance, and we'll go to your number 2, and I think maybe it'll have something to do with Penske. Just a guess.
Me, Penske, with my number 2. Now I'm going to say, actually, I'm going to go a different direction, actually, in terms of the cleanliness of this race. The last couple years, we've had craziness in turn 3 of lap 1, right? And taking out multiple cars early. Everybody got through the opening lap, and just really impressive. We really didn't have any crashes. That we had Romain Grosjean punting a driver, which you're always good for one of those, it seems like, every race. But most all of the retirements were either mechanical or errors by drivers on track. So really clean race. You never know with limited practice or limited testing time, right, over the offseason, who's going to come out a little over aggressive, especially with 5 rookies in the field, and who's going to come out maybe pushing it a little bit too hard and create something early. We didn't have that this year, and it was a welcome change. I felt like it was maybe that's part of the reason why we looked at this race as bland or boring or not very exciting, was the fact that we didn't have much in the way of chaos on the course.
That was a massive surprise to me that we didn't have a lap 1, turn 1 incident here.
Right.
It seems to be a given every year.
And it was good to see. And you were kind of anticipating it, waiting at 27 cars going into turn 1, turn 3, all the problem spots on this track, and everybody was able to get through it and in one piece. So really impressive driving for a lot of guys, particularly younger dudes that are in that position for the first time in terms of starting St. Pete in traffic. So well done, because you never know in that first race how guys are going to come out of a long off season with limited testing time, just how aggressive they're going to be. And it was well within the limits of everybody to stay out of trouble, be cordial, and get through.
All right, so if you're not going to touch Penske, so I talk Chevy.
Yes, go ahead.
I'll touch this. Penske, after they struggled on street courses, we talked at length about how the end of the season, the second half of the schedule with all the short ovals, should benefit not only Penske, but Josef Newgarden in particular, in terms of winning the championship, which we both picked him to win the championship last week in our preseason predictions episode. Download that if you haven't caught up yet. But you have Newgarden on pole. You have Scott McLaughlin, who started a bit further back in 9th, Will Power in 8th, but they go 1, 2, 4. If Penske's figured out street courses for this season,
over.
Yeah, it's over.
Well, because we said, you better be ahead of Penske going into the latter portion of the season with all the short ovals on the schedule. But now if they can be in a position of power in the front part of the schedule where they can load up on points at road and street courses, then yeah, it's game over for sure. So we saw Josef Newgarden, and I felt kind of like the attention to his refocusing was a little over dramatic. Okay, yeah, he cut himself off from social media and Bus Bros is gone and all this stuff. But it's like everybody kind of reevaluates in the off season, right? I mean, you had Scott McLaughlin came in and lost 15, 16 pounds of the off season. Like most everybody is coming into the season saying they're refocused, refreshed, their body is in good shape, blah, blah, blah. So
nothing new.
Yeah.
I did find it interesting that Scott McLaughlin is training with Julia Piquet, which is the daughter of Nelson Piquet. I thought that was interesting. And she's either married or dated Daniel Suarez, NASCAR driver. For a long
she is
time.
dating. I think she is dating Daniel Suarez.
I thought that was a fascinating story. We learned that Rinus VeeKay, who got married in the offseason as well, his wife is a amateur now boxer.
Yeah,
she used to
looks
compete.
like she could kick everybody's ass in the paddock.
So a model, but also she does boxing, and the video they were showing was like, yeah, no, would not mess with her.
Legit.
So that was interesting. There are a lot of good kind of off-season things. A lot of drivers either got married or had a baby, and they did a good job of touching on that stuff beyond just the normal their off season, blah, 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 fuming after, not winning Indy,
right.
Those kind of things. Like, they did a good job of that, not only in the pre-race, but also throughout the broadcast on NBC.
I thought they did well. It was kind of a tired trope by the end of the weekend with Josef Newgarden and always refocus, blah, blah, because everybody, you can make a story about every single driver of the 27 drivers entered that were refocused and prioritizing 2024 and blah, blah, blah. So I kind of was tired of it by the end of the weekend. But if Newgarden's going to be that, because remember, the guy hasn't won a championship since 2020, and that's a big deal. 2019. So it's a big deal. It's 5 years for Josef Newgarden, and I think you're seeing now that he has that Indianapolis 500 win, he is really looking at the season at large again, because I think the last couple of years he's really zeroed in, and maybe his season was made or broken in May because of how much he had put on that race. And now he can really look at the entirety of the season instead of one race as being the best he possibly can be. And not saying he didn't do that before, but I really think it's a mindset change to him and a relief off his shoulders that he has that 500 win. And it showed in the first race of the season at St. Pete.
All right, who's up? Is it me or you? I lost track.
I think I'm up.
You're up.
Let's talk. It's a general kind of thing. Let's talk about the drivers that impressed over the weekend, that unexpectedly impressed. I feel like Santino Ferrucci finishing 11th for Foyt, tremendous. That's a team that has had zero pace on road and street courses in recent years. You look at the ability of Kiffin Simpson, who we looked at and say, this guy isn't ready for IndyCar. He not only finishes 14th, which is impressive, but stays out of trouble for the entirety of the race, doesn't put a wheel wrong. I never saw him go off course during the race. I don't know about during the weekend, but was really impressive.
I think he went off either in the warm-up, but again, it's just going in the runoff area. It's not like damaging a car. Look, for any rookie starting on a street course, that is a tough ask.
Yeah. I even look at the other rookie. When you look at Tom Blomqvist, the day he had.
Solid. He would have finished higher if not for, I think something went wrong. It's either on his final pit stop or just the way that the caution fell.
Right.
But started 17th, finished 17th. Meyer-Shank as a whole.
Yeah.
Felix Rosenqvist
one of the fastest all weekend.
Contended for a pole, started second, did fade to seventh. I think that had more to do with just Chevy being clearly the better engine at this track in terms of pace. But yeah, it was a great bounce back weekend for Meyer-Shank, and again, a team I thought going into the season would impress because they have a quality driver in Felix Rosenqvist, guy who's pretty steady. He's not flashy. You have a very talented driver in Tom Blomqvist. Yes, he's a rookie, so he'll be learning these tracks, but he'll figure it out, and he's been competitive pace-wise right away. So I think it's a big weekend for them, and you talked about Ferrucci as well, starting 14th, finishing 11th. He had pace all race long. There was no fall off with that team, and to be just outside the top 10 made it tough for a lot of guys to get past him, like Alex Below for a while. I also think the factor of, again, that Penske partnership, right? That technical alliance with Foyt is going to do wonders for this team, not just having success at Indy like we saw last year, but this could maybe be a season-long type of thing with that entry.
And, last year it started at Indy with Foyt and how they showed pace, but it really didn't translate to other races, especially road and street. And if Foyt can be competitive, even with just the Ferrucci car, if they can consistently get top 12, top 15s, I think that's a step forward for that team. And they're off to a good start. And I texted you only half joking when it was Felix, I think at the time was running second, like a third of the way through the race. And I'm like, this is already better than anything Meyer-Shank did last year, and finishing a little lower than that. What, he finished 7th?
Yeah.
6th or 7th. He was running higher than that for the majority of the race, but as you said, kind of Chevy showing their strength the more the race went. But you have to feel a lot better about Meyer-Shank right now after one race than you ever did for the entirety of the season a year ago. So that's my number 2. What about your number 3?
This one's tough because I could pick two different things here. I'm going to go with the event itself and an aspect that I think, based on what we saw Sunday, they need to change. So you either need to drop down 5 or 10 laps or add 5 or 10 laps. Because the fact that you started out green, which granted was a surprise, you had everyone pretty much on the 2-stop strategy unless they got caught out by yellow or had issues. They're just, and I understand, the tires were developed, the green Waiuli tires were developed with the hybrid in mind, but there just was not enough fall off from the alternate greens,
right, from
the black primary tires. And so I don't know if that's, am I putting more stock on if this had 5 or 10 more laps, you have 3-stop and 2-stop strategy, or is this more on the tires? And I'm not blaming Firestone here.
No.
The expectation was the hybrid would be ready.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they do their testing, and a street course tire, it's not like they're testing at St. Pete.
Well, I mean, that's kind of a problem for IndyCar is you had all your suppliers and your partners develop a car, develop tires, whatever, with the hybrid in mind, and then you don't have the hybrid. That's the thing is, the problem is, okay, you take away 5 laps or you add 5 laps, and then the cautions fall a certain way, and then all of a sudden it's not a fuel, it becomes a fuel mileage race again. So it's difficult to make significant changes because the course of the race can dictate how it's run. But at the same time, now I agree, and this is the issues you were going to have because Firestone, for example, is developing a tire and developing a formula with the hybrid in mind, and when you don't have the hybrid, it affects it. And that's what we saw over the weekend with no fall off between the primaries and the alternates.
And I think that's really the issue why this race lacked, a lot of intrigue. We didn't have an opening lap chaos like we saw last year. We didn't have a late caution like we often see as well. And I think a lot of that had to do because the tire fall off just simply wasn't there. So you're not having tires go away and guys take bigger risks. If the tires are working, yes, you had brake issues, and we saw that with Marcus Armstrong and several other drivers, but that was one element, I guess, that kind of left to be desired. I think why we saw kind of a more ho-hum race to start the season.
Well, we knew this could be potentially an issue when they pushed back the hybrid, so at least through one race, we're seeing the after effects of that.
All right, your number 3.
My number 3. Well, let's look at Andretti because they were looking all right. And the talk of Sunday and throughout, they're refocused. Now they only have 3 cars, all that stuff. Well, Marcus Ericsson with a mechanical. And it just seems to happen much more than anybody else is issues at Andretti with reliability. And it burned Marcus Ericsson, a guy that was showing significant pace. You had Colton Herta finish in the top 5, a little lap, but just never seemed to be a threat in that. And you wonder again, is Andretti with a admittedly stronger lineup, you feel, going to be able to pull off without continually making mistakes behind the scenes in terms of issues? And it's tough to judge an entire team on one mechanical failure because you don't know if it's a part or whatever, but at the same time, it's just continuing the trend. And we talk about other teams getting involved in the championship chase, and it's been Penske and Ganassi for the last decade. You think, well, can Andretti make a run and jump up? Well, through one race, they don't look like they can because they're making the same mistakes they continuously do year after year after year in terms of reliability.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not going to overreact on one race.
Well, I think it's concerning because you look at it and say, well, are we here we go again with Andretti? Are they going to cost themselves podiums and wins because of reliability? Because Marcus Ericsson was definitely in the picture to potentially get a podium, I felt like. And his run was very impressive in his first race with Andretti. And you just wonder, are we setting ourselves up for another struggling season for Andretti because of the little things?
That's the one difference from Andretti and the other top teams is the Andretti mechanical gremlin, right? I mean, it's the reality, and they clean that up. They're a true championship contender.
Right.
They can't clean that up. They're the fourth best of the big 4 teams. Plain and simple.
Right. And we'll see if it's just a one-time thing. But it definitely is almost a here we go again type thing with Andretti, where the margin for error is so small when you're trying to compete with Ganassi and Penske. You don't want to have these opportunities pass you by.
All right, so those are 3 things from this race. Any other kind of takeaways or things you want to mention on St. Pete? There just really wasn't a whole lot. I mean, Romain Grosjean qualified well, and then a bonehead move to take someone out. I guess water's wet. He took out Linus Lundqvist.
And was on a good run, too. That was somebody else that you would have said at the end of the weekend, if he would have been able to bring it home intact and not getting involved in anything, was Grosjean's performance in his first race with Juncos was very impressive. But once again, he has issues. He eventually had a mechanical issue and then had to retire, but punting somebody into the wall, into the tires.
Avoidable contact penalty, as one would expect. He got a drive-through penalty, so that ruined his race. Again, though, the pace was there, and I think that was kind of the surprise. And I said last week, with a car, you don't expect to have the pace. Well, they had the pace.
Yeah.
He's just got to finish the job, and that's long been the issue for him in IndyCar, is not pace, it's finishing and finishing races.
Yes. It's taking what the race gives you, bring home max effort, max positions, whether it's first, second, sixth, ninth, just finish. And he wasn't able to. Now, question is whether he would have been able to finish. Inevitably, the car had an issue and he had to retire, but he was up there and then threw it away with the bad move, and then it just got worse from there.
A lot of other little notes to mention and pass along on this race. Of course, John Bon Jovi was there. And he, there's a picture. We saw this from Hickey93, friend of the podcast. Taylor Swift's dad, Scott Swift, were pictured together.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
Talking about buying the series, I imagine.
Yeah, hopefully.
Brett Michaels was there. You saw video of him talking to John Bon Jovi. Had a good interview with Bon Jovi during the course of the race, talking about his 2-seater ride and all that stuff. So
he even mentioned he'd be, he tweeted, he said, "When can I do it again? Thanks Meyershank Racing and thanks Elio from your co-captain and backseat driver. P.S. Time for me to buy a team," with several question marks. I mean, I don't think anything will come of that, but look, it's always good when someone gets that kind of experience around IndyCar and they kind of see it and be like, hey, this is really cool.
Yeah, it would be cool to have maybe more of John Bon Jovi around, at least as a, if he continues to be a sponsor, that'd be nice. Maybe the 500. Maybe could he be on the car for that and have him around May? If he loved St. Pete, get him around the 500 in May, and he could really have some fun.
Let's see. All I got out of this was him meeting with Scott Swift. It basically just all but confirms Taylor Swift is going to be doing one of the season finale concerts for the Nashville race.
Oh, you think?
No, but we can hope.
Yes, we could definitely hope. That would bring in, I don't care, love or hate the Swifties.
That brings in eyeballs and social media impressions, all the things.
People in the seats.
IndyCar is just one Taylor Swift concert at a race weekend away from everything being
if you
turned around.
If you can get her to one race, why not just all 17?
Yeah,
just have her at every race.
True. Well, we'd take one.
Could you imagine the people complaining about people there just for the concert? If Taylor Swift is performing somewhere,
there are people complaining over the weekend, like people who are just there for the festival and the party atmosphere, and I'm like,
that's the point of street racing.
Yeah. Also, have you heard of the Snake Pit?
Yeah, well, somehow that gets a pass. Apparently, it's just a bunch of, and sometimes, trust me, on this podcast, I am the old man yells at cloud, but I'm not to that point.
No,
where I'm like, oh, these people, they don't even enjoy racing, and they're there. Who cares? They're there, right?
They're there. They bought a ticket. They fill a seat.
Exactly. They're paying just as much as everybody else. I don't care if they're not there to watch the race. They're there.
I do not care either.
I would rather, here's my thing. I would rather, let's say, take 1,000 tickets, for example, and let's say Iowa. I would rather have 1,000 people buy tickets with no interest in IndyCar than 1,000 free tickets being given out to diehard race fans.
Yes.
Because they're paying as opposed to free tickets.
Well, that and you get eyeballs for people who aren't familiar with IndyCar.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you grow the sport. You get the sport younger, which the sport desperately needs based on the metrics.
Yep.
Other notes, we didn't talk about this. Pato Award, another second place finish. That's 5 second place finishes now since his last win. Obviously, he's a top 5 driver in the series. I don't think anyone's debating that. But I mean, does it just feel kind of comical at this point that it's yet again another second place? Granted, he didn't have a car to compete with Newgarden, but 5 now, it's just hard to believe.
Yeah, it's just...
You have to think the win is coming. But we thought that all last year.
Right? And it just, you keep getting closer and closer, and that's the thing with McLaren. And altogether, with Pato O'Ward, I feel like they're closer to winning a championship than Andretti is. I think Pato O'Ward has proven to be, at least so far, the better driver between him and Colton Herta, and more consistent for sure. But man, it's continuously just getting so close and not getting over the hump. So you feel like it's coming this year, but like you mentioned, we felt like that all last year and it didn't happen. So at the very least, you say, okay, he's still there. If you're McLaren, we're still in the running, and we're running well and all that with Pato. Something's got to give at some point, right?
One would think. I mean, he's too talented of a driver. On the flip side, you have Josef Newgarden picking up his 30th IndyCar win, and it's wild to think we now have drivers who don't have any kart or champ car wins. I mean, right. He's one of those on that list. 30th win, so he passed Team Penske legend Rick Mears, now 13th on the all-time list, just one back of Paul Tracy, Dario Franchitti, and Elio Castroneves. And again, still only 33, so there's plenty of time for him to approach a Scott Dixon level number here.
Just keep winning, getting dubs, and I mean, if he stays on track sometime next year, could be getting his 40th win, depending on how successful he is. He had 4 wins last year. If he can get 4 or 5 this year, same pace next year, so definitely attainable. Speaking of Scott Dixon, were you surprised that he was, I want to say, all the way down in 9th, but a guy that's never won at St. Pete and still looking to win? And I felt like he would be in the picture, at least of a top 5. The fact that he finished 9th, anyway, surprising to you?
I mean, Ganassi, this is probably part of a bigger conversation that we didn't really talk about much in the preseason, but Ganassi expanding to 5 cars, I guess I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Spreading Ganassi expanded, Andretti contracted in this previous offseason. So I guess I'm not surprised. Like, Kiffin Simpson running well was a massive surprise, I think, to a lot of people. He showed himself well, finishing in 14th. Alex Blow was able to rally and finish in 6th. Then granted, a lot of it was clearly Chevy was the better engine here. So I'm not putting a whole lot of stock in just one race, but Dixon's, for whatever reason, and he's not won at St. Pete, which is hard to believe, but it's just one of those tracks.
Right.
And also Ganassi having more entries, right? I mean, have they spread themselves too thin? It's an interesting conversation.
Definitely, I think so, because Andretti feels like it's leaner and meaner and can fight for more wins with just 3 cars. McLaren is kind of held back on going to 4 full-time cars. Maybe some of the reasoning is we don't want to spread ourselves too thin. Meanwhile, we have Ganassi there at 5. And remember, back in the day when Ganassi had that satellite B team, and they eventually cut that because at 4 cars, they felt like they were too big.
Well, and there was clear separation between Scott and
Correct.
Dario and everybody else.
Yeah, it was
Graham and Charlie.
Graham and, yeah.
Like the pace there, I mean, it was essentially like a completely separate operation. This is all one team, all one entity. I will be fascinated to see how this works out, and if there are 5 cars again at Ganassi next year. My guess would be no.
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
My guess would be no.
I think this was strictly chasing money with Kiffin Simpson. I'm not saying they're wrong in doing it, but there's no way they're on the track with 5 cars without a hefty check.
I would say the money allowed them to not only get Kiffin Simpson, but also keep Marcus Armstrong. And I think that was and also Linus Lundqvist, maybe that was more of the play.
True.
Since obviously Plo's entry is solid, you get DHL and Dixon's entry is solid. So it is maybe just to keep those other guys. And so that's what they did. Last year, this is from Trackside Online, Honda won all 5 street course races. Obviously Chevy went 1, 2, 3, 4 on Sunday.
I was thinking about this after the race and the dominance we saw at Chevy. If one race doesn't a season make, but if Chevy can show that it's the better power plant across the entire season by and large, do you think that helps or hurts the chances of Honda returning long term? Or do you think it has no bearing? Does Honda kind of get in it like, well, we're not going out like this? Or do they say, well, we're losing, ground to Chevy anyway? Or do you think it has no bearing on that decision?
I would say no. The championship doesn't have a bearing. It's all about the Indy 500 for Honda. And remember, they went and won the 500 2020, 21, and 22. Chevy won last year for the first time since 2019. Honda cares about the Indy 500. The championship is nice.
True.
They obviously got that last year with Palou, but they care about the Indy 500. So I guess that's what I'm going to put stock in the most. Josef Newgarden celebrated. How'd he celebrate? Winning St. Pete. Well, later in the day, posted a picture, went to Publix, got himself a chicken tender pub sub, some macaroni salad, some sun chips, cookie cake. Are you a pub sub guy?
I've never had a pub sub.
I don't know if I have either. I know everyone raves about it. I go to Publix, and it's like when we go to Florida, like once a year, and it's just like, it's shocking because we're like an Aldi family, so there's so many options. We just go crazy. But got himself a pub sub. Also, did you see this on the broadcast? I know they mentioned it, but Caitlin Clark's autograph on Colton Herta's aero screen on the side. Again, Gamebridge partnership that she has. She'll be playing for the Indiana Fever next year in the WNBA. Colton Herta sponsored by Gamebridge. It makes sense, but these are the kind of little things. I noticed stuff like this. IndyCar is doing a really good job at things like that. And this is a step up from what we saw even like just a couple years ago.
And I would imagine that Caitlin Clark will be involved in...
Guaranteed, she will probably either be the pace car driver or green flag waiver for the Indy GP. Yeah. If not a connection for the Indy 500.
Well, I think next year. Probably not this year.
Oh, I think this year.
When's the draft?
The season starts in like mid-May. So
would she play for May, or is it not until next year?
No, she plays this year.
Really? She will play up this upcoming season. Okay, that makes sense. I thought it like the draft wasn't until like June or something like that. I didn't.
No,
I don't know. I'm not up on my WNBA. So, but yeah, if she's a part of the Fever by May of this year, definitely will be a part of the festivities at the 500 at some point.
The draft is April 15th. So,
okay.
I mean, the Fever will know, and that'll be locked in.
Yep.
Good stuff there. Also, Josef Newgarden, career laps led. He surpassed 4,000.
Not too shabby.
I think it's not hard to guess the track he's led the most laps at. Don't think too hard.
Iowa?
Yeah. So at Iowa, he has led 1,847 laps. So nearly half of his laps led.
So at least 40%, almost 45% of his all-time led laps are at Iowa.
Would you guess number 2?
Number 2, I will say Texas.
That's number 3 at 313. Number 2 is Gateway at 582.
All right.
Those are the top ones. So again, a guy who's dominated on short ovals, so no surprise to see the shorter ovals as the top 2, but just wild that Iowa's, 40% roughly of his laps led.
We knew he was dominant at Iowa. That kind of puts things in perspective on just how dominant.
Yes, very much so. Anything else you want to add about St. Pete?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was a good opening event. Usually is. You wish it was kind of a little bit more exciting. You kind of made the comment, you kind of throw F1 under the bus in terms of lack of excitement at the front. Just felt like that was a F1-esque type race. Even when Newgarden kind of got cycled back to second or third, you knew he was eventually going to pass for the lead, or guys were going to have to pit. And it was just one of those dominant races by Newgarden and Penske and Chevy. And we'll see what this means going forward. Does it set the tone for the season? Does it prove to be an outlier? Those will be the questions we'll have until we go, what's the race after Thermal? Barber?
Long Beach.
Long Beach, that's right.
Coming up mid-April. So I actually have one or two other quick notes. Nolan Siegel dominated in Indy Next, a.k.a. Indy Lights.
Yep, watch that. It was flag-to-flag dominance by Siegel.
And then former Alpine F1 team principal Otmar Safnauer was there at the race. So again, he's a friend of Townsend Bell. So that they go back 20 years, according to Nathan Brown. He was in town for a friend's birthday party. So essentially a guest of Townsend Bell for the weekend. So that's why he was there.
Good to see. Very nice. But no, it was another great weekend down in St. Pete. Very warm, like 80s down there for the majority of the weekend. And a good start to the season. Not the most excitement, but season's underway.
Yes, and that's the good. We'll get to kind of the bad, which was leading up to the weekend and all the owners talking and comments by Michael Andretti and others. Interesting driver tidbits for the Indy 500 for this year and next year. Also got an update on David Malukas moving forward. Of course, he sat out Callum Ilott filling in for him at St. Pete. We'll get to all that in news and notes. If you agree or disagree with our takes on St. Pete, we'd love for you to interact with us. You can find us at newtrackrecordpodcast.com. While you're there, sign up for the email list. It is free. You'll get an email after episodes are posted, plus any other special announcements that come down. You can also check out the store. We have t-shirts and stickers for sale for you. Also, you can support us via Patreon, patreon.com/newtrackrecord. Thanks to Xavier and others for their support, starting at just $1 a month. On social media, you can find us IndyCar Podcast on Twitter/X, also on Instagram. And you can email us, newtrackrecordpodcast.com, newtrackrecordpodcast@gmail.com. That's the email. On Facebook, just search for New Track Record. So if you still want to add and be a part in our fantasy league, send us a message, an email, what have you, and with your email address, and we'll get you signed up to be a part of the league. So thanks to everyone who signed up. I think this is the most we've ever had. So
yeah, I think it's about 50 overall individual entries. I'm 6th after the first week, so I think I'm just going to shut the league down because
I made a late mistake in changed who I thought would win the race because on my pick the podium I had Newgarden and then I swapped it out. That was a mistake.
Would you go with McLaughlin?
I can't remember who I changed it to, but it's like I think I had Ericsson up there. Obviously that didn't pan out, but not really his fault.
Yeah.
If I would have had Newgarden, I would have had 25 more points.
Well, don't second guess yourself now.
Yeah, I know. And I did that like Sunday morning, so that was a mistake. But you can join the Fantasy League. All right, time. And don't forget, you can always download the podcast, listen for free on your favorite podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, wherever you listen to podcasts, again, all for free. Time for the mailbag, and we'll start with Rate the Race. How would you rate this race?
Man, oh man. 5.
Yeah, I'm going 6.
Yeah, I was debating 5.5. So our average is 5.5. I mean, if it's elevated only in my mind because it was a season opener, and it's always tough to have an absolute terrible race as your season opener because the excitement of getting it started, but just lacked really much drama. Even as you mentioned, with the lack of tire fall off, you didn't have really a stories of undercut and overcuts and stuff like that, and people long stints and when do you switch tire? Like there was no real drama there, and there really wasn't much racing overall in the midfield either. It was just kind of static, and it is what it is. But hopefully we have better races ahead.
Here's what other people had to say. This from Beans B Card Blog. Gave it a 7. Never a fan of one driver dominating. There was a good amount of racing throughout the field. I felt like, what was it, like a third, or either a third or 2/3? I can't remember. It was getting racy on a restart, and then it just kind of flamed out.
Yeah.
Tudor Indy gave it a 7. Push to Pass Cast gave it a 5. So agreeing with you. Pochevchenko said, I think because all the teams of the car figured out, the finishing order went to who had their fuel strategy the most perfect. There's some action, but mostly between turns 4 and 10, not at turn 1 where I was seated. I'll give this race a 6 out of 10. Talking about the car figured out. Yeah, Marshall Pruitt had a story on Racer.com. 200th race for the DW12.
I mentioned this to you offhand because they were showing some highlights of the 2020 race and stuff like that. And I like look at him like there's nothing different about this event since 2020. Like you could show me highlights from 4, 5, 6 years ago, and it just looks like the same.
At
event.
least you have the aero screen, right?
Yeah,
but 2020 on, it's the same car. Yes, they make modifications, but the average fan can't see that.
Yeah, same car, same core, like just nothing new. And I think that's, again, you mentioned you looked at NASCAR last weekend that debuted their new formula for the short tracks or the medium tracks. I mean, So that was a talking point for NASCAR. Of course, with Formula One, there's constant updates, right? With cars, it's just kind of, this is it. This is the static. It's plain. There's nothing new. You should feel excited about, everything that's new. And that's what NBC, God bless them, tried to hype up everything that's new. And it's like, other than drivers and different cars, there's really nothing new in this series this year. And unfortunately, that's kind of been the case for the last several years.
This from M. Rusamarov. Hopefully I got that right. I was so excited about IndyCar starting. Going to give it an 8. Happy for Will Power as well. Tyler_Allen gave it a 2.
Ooh, man, brutal.
Jeremy from HBG says I give it a 6. Too processional. We didn't even get a squirrel appearance.
We did in practice, not in the race.
Run_Mark_Run said 6. Can't hate Josef for the dominance, but zzz in the last half.
And we didn't have our what we've gotten used to, our Liberty Mutual ad that pops up thinking the caution's going to come out.
They got rid of the yellow part, I think, sometime last season.
But I didn't see a Liberty Mutual ad of whatsoever.
That was always fun on the rundown. We're like, wait, caution? No. Just the Liberty Mutual ad.
And for those scoring at home lap, 51 is when we had through the field.
You're always keeping track of that.
And my flyover rating, 6 out of 10 this past week.
They were late, right?
A little late. But they were trainers. They weren't fighters or bombers or anything, so there's points off there. But overall, a solid. It's not like a civilian airplane or anything like that, or no flyover. But flyover ranking 6 out of 10 for St. Pete.
Hunter's Way 67 gave it a 5. You're in for a snoozer when from the drop of the green, the announcers are talking about fuel saving. I have a feeling it's going to be like this until the hybrids come. Great point. NK Harden gave it a 5. First couple laps after the first pit stop were about the only drama up front. The rest of the field is mostly follow the leader. Nice to have IndyCar back, but that wasn't a great show. Jamin T14 gave it a 6. Nice to have the season underway. There was some interesting runs, but go back and watch the USF Pro race from Sunday from about position 5 through 15 with some great racing. Brian Brooks, a bunch of numbers, gave it an 8. A bunch of numbers on the username. Jay Blasteri gave it a 6. Newgarden had the field covered. Penske had the field covered. Chevy had the field covered. That is all correct.
All the above. Definitely sets the tone, though. Newgarden and Penske. When we talk about, can any other team outside of the top 2 sneak in there? Well, through one race, the answer is no. They cannot.
You posted the poll, which IndyCar driver's finishing position at St. Pete surprised you the most? 37% of you said Kiffin Simpson in 14th. 25.5% said Marcus Ericsson in 25th. Just over 26% said Santino Ferrucci in 11th, and nearly 11% said Scott Dixon in 9th. Hickey 93 saying, not sure why a driver running well and getting a mechanical to P25 would be a surprise. I just think we thought, that's a guy who's going to contend for top 5s.
Yeah, and admittedly, when I put that up, I wasn't thinking Marcus Ericsson and Andretti, because if I did remember that, I wouldn't have put him up, because Andretti's just do mechanicals here and there. And then, once again, we saw it bite. Andretti was at a position to maybe have 2 guys in their top 5 top 5 with him and Herta.
And the fact that clearly passing was difficult because Kirkwood was back in 12th. He couldn't really make up any ground.
Yeah, couldn't really do anything. So, hopefully it doesn't set the tone for the course of the season in terms of being able to pass, at least until we get to the hybrids. But I know we'll have hybrid technology to talk about in the latter half of the season and going into next year. But for now, you're kind of just like, what's new? Other than guys switching teams, there's just not a lot there.
500 Indy 1911 said if the answer isn't Ferrucci and a Foyt on a street course at 11th on true speed, I call BS.
And that's who I voted for.
Yep, same for me. Actually, I may have voted for Kiffin Simpson.
You can make a case for that too.
Either one.
But I think Kiffin Simpson is at least with a power team.
Yeah.
But Ferrucci is with Foyt.
But going into the weekend, I would have for sure expected Simpson to crash.
One of the rookies. I thought all the rookies at least didn't look like they didn't belong. And it's easy to be exposed on a street course like that, where one error puts you into the wall, or if you're not up to pace, you're falling off. It's obvious. And we didn't really have that.
Nick J. Fletcher said, can I pencil in not Romain Grosjean?
That was not the biggest surprise. It was probably the biggest given. I think it was a surprise on the pace that Junko showed with Grosjean.
Very much so.
But inevitably, you knew he was going to do something. And then it was kind of moot anyway, because he was still on track and then had the mechanical issue.
Yeah, I think that is true. So that's pretty much everything we had. in the mailbag. We had a couple other people, of course, commenting on the comments by Michael Andretti. But that's the gist of what we're going to cover this week in the mailbag. Time for news and notes, and let's get right into it. The comments by Michael Andretti. We've been calling for an owner to say something, and he did. He basically said Penske Entertainment needs to do more or, quote, sell this series. That's what Michael Andretti had to say on Friday. So you knew someone would speak out. Chip Ganassi essentially protecting Roger Penske. Not a surprise because Chip benefits from this socialist state of IndyCar, right? Where it's Penske, Ganassi, and everybody else in terms of true competitors in the championship.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm glad an owner said something.
Kind of knew it was going to be Michael, didn't you?
Yeah.
I mean,
you knew it wouldn't be Chip.
Zach.
Obviously, it's not going to be Roger.
No. But I think it was twofold because then the story comes out, Saturday morning or Sunday morning about a closed door meeting with other team owners that happened in February about the direction of the series. And that was with Roger Penske. And I think what was interesting in that story is basically pointing out the fact that Roger Penske is easy to anger. And I think he is, and part of being a businessman is being callous and ruthless and all that stuff. And I think sometimes Roger Penske falls into that, and we kind of throw Penske Corp in general in this. And I really wonder if it is Penske Corp or if it starts with Roger Penske and it kind of filters down. But basically it was said that he is almost unapproachable when it comes to suggestions or complaints. And I think a lot of that meeting dialogue was about having him be more approachable. But I also felt, and it was kind of a throwaway line in there that brought up in that meeting, was Liberty Media and the potential to either be sell the series or be a minority stake investor in the series. If Liberty Media would even be interested in that, I don't know. But
Liberty was interested in buying IndyCar before.
But they were buying IndyCar. But are they interested in buying a partial stake?
Probably not.
Are they interested in owning 49%, for example, of the series? I think that's the biggest question. Do they want it all or nothing? I'm not sure. But
remember, Liberty Media is a minority investor in Meyer Shank Racing.
Correct. So I think finally we're hearing instances or with Michael directly hearing it from him of starting to push back on Roger Penske and Penske Corp, because you and I have been wondering when that would happen, if it would ever happen, and why it wasn't happening. What are these team owners really afraid of? And it's finally happening, and it's good to see, because over the years, team owners are never happy, and we've even talked to the podcast about they'll find something to complain about. That's just what they do, and then all of a sudden it was just silence from team owners over the last couple of years, and it was just very, very awkward, very weird. But I think you're seeing enough of negative stories come out that the team owners finally have looked at it and say, okay, we need to speak up.
Interesting, in that Marshall Pruitt article on Racer.com, Foyt, Coyne, and Juncos, Hollinger, the team's not included in that original meeting back in February. I find that fascinating.
It's always the power teams, right?
Yes.
It's always the power teams.
Also, Penske Corp says they have a small group of team owners, including Zach Brown, Jim Meyer, Dan Tauris, who's, again, co-owner of Andretti Global, forming a subcommittee focused on series growth, moving forward. That from Nathan Brown of the Indy Star. Obviously, Penske didn't like Michael Andretti's comments, but I find it...
But he's not wrong, though.
Yeah, I also find it interesting that you had this going into the weekend, this comment by Roger Penske saying, "We've been falling over rocks that have been put in front of us. Many of them, I would not say we caused it, but it's within our company. But if you get into the details on this stuff, we are busting our butts." That in an AP story.
I don't know what that means, really. I mean, is that still kind of, and that's what Chip kind of said. He brought up the pandemic I
don't buy that anymore.
3-4 years ago. Come on.
And you have teams that could threaten to block the hybrid this year, which is an interesting note in a Motorsport Week article as well. There's going to be teams not necessarily protesting that, but I don't think there are going to be happy teams. I doubt it's going to happen after May, Comments by Christian Lundgaard, I believe there.
Interesting. Well, considerably if some of these teams that haven't had a lot of time with the hybrid.
Yeah, and they're among those teams.
Yeah, so
at Ray Hall.
Yeah, I'm glad there's dialogue finally that the team owners are expressing their displeasure in certain things. And hopefully, and what was said in the Marshall Pruitt article was that was reciprocated via Roger Penske and his group, basically saying, okay, we'll be a little bit more communicative and open to discussions and debate and stuff, but we'll see.
A couple other quick notes before we get to our tweets of the week and random split air driver of the week. Speaking of Andretti, they're working at pace on F1. Also of note that they plan to have a partnership with an existing NASCAR team. They hope to enter NASCAR with an existing partner team, so keep that in mind. We mentioned some driver news. So David Malukas will miss the Thermal $1 million challenge. Callum Ilott, you would assume, would be the fill-in there.
Carried himself well this past weekend.
Yeah, solid performance. Also, this is interesting. So Bill Abel of Abel Motorsports told Ryan Marine on IndyCar Radio, this is courtesy of Trackside Online, they expect Abel to be back in the Indy 500, which we already knew. They'd love for R.C. Enerson to be back, but aren't sure that will work out. They're talking with other drivers. And then we got this note from Nathan Brown, Devlin DeFrancesco, working towards a 500 deal for this year. So there's a logical fit. He says he's confident I'll be back. He'll be back in the series in 2025. He said, I have a good inclination, whatever that means.
Interesting
notes. And then Shane Van Gisbergen, supercar star, who obviously won at Chicago in the street race in NASCAR, inspired by Scott McLaughlin to run the Indy 500 one day.
It'd be cool to see.
Absolutely. So
also Andretti releasing their preliminary renderings of their new racing facility, which looks it gives me McLaren HQ vibes, doesn't it?
That's kind of what it's modeled after.
It pretty much is. Looks pretty good.
And don't forget Lionheart. So we're recording this early on a Tuesday morning here in the U.S. on March 12th. It is available 9 o'clock tonight Eastern on HBO and Max for the Lionheart documentary.
Sweet.
All right, tweets of the week time. We have a few. First from Merrick Speed. It'll always be Indy Lights, #Boomer. Marshall Pruitt, #Hall Pass. If you watch the race, you know. We don't need to go any further detail on that one. And from Kiffin Simpson, he said, fuel mileage race, say no more. And it's a great shot of his rear wing that says gas savings. I thought that was clever. And with that, we are ready for our random split air driver of the week.
All right, we're going to the IRL and we're going to the mid 2000s. I can't talk. 2005, 2006. Going with Jeff Bucknam.
Ooh, Jeff Bucknam. Right? I remember him.
Yes, I do too. A guy that was the son of former F1 driver Ronnie Bucknam. He started 11 races in 2005 and 2006 with Dreyer and Reinbold, Himmelgarn, and AJ Foyt Enterprises. His first race of his career was at Motegi in 2005, and then it was Indy. The next race finished 22nd overall. His best finish in his career of his 11 starts was at Sonoma, a 10th place finish in 2005 for AJ Foyt. Came back in 2006 and ran Indy for Himmelgarn Racing, and then had 6 starts for Foyt Racing in the latter half of the year with a best finish of 13th at Milwaukee and Kentucky. So in his only 2 Indy 500s, 22nd and 32nd were his finishes after starting 21st, and 22nd.
Also did do the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 2003 with Team Bucknam Racing. They did not finish, completing 27 laps. So, I remember the name. I remember him for Foyt in particular, running a handful of races, as you mentioned, in the 2006 season. That was the rough days toward, right before the end of the split. 2006, 2007. It was tough.
Plugging through
17 car grids.
Yes, it was a grind, to say the least. But did 24-hour Le Mans, like you mentioned. He did some SCCA national championships in the late 90s. And did that at Mid-Ohio at Star Mazda. And that's about it. I mean, he didn't do much else outside of open wheel. And again, did some American Le Mans, like we mentioned, 2001 to 2005 with that contingent or that time in IRL. Now 57 years old. A hometown of Glendale, California. And again, 11 starts. His best finish of 10th at Sonoma overall in 2005. And that's it. This week's Random Split Error Driver of the Week, Mr. Jeff Bucknam.
And of course, we won't have the TV rating for you. So we'll have that next week, and we'll get you set for Thermal for next week's episode, a preview for that. For Justin Kinney, I'm Caleb Hatch. Thanks for joining us on New Track Record Podcast.
Podcasts by Federated Media.